Welcome back. I want to continue with Rome today. First, I want to talk about some of the prominent Roman generals slash emperors. Of course, there are far too many to go into any depth here, but I do want to talk about a few and see if we can establish some themes, maybe through these gentlemen's careers, some themes that illuminate Roman society and Roman politics. The first is Cincinnatus, regarded as what's the best word, the best phrase, a noble Roman. Cincinnatus took dictatorial powers during a crisis where Rome was being invaded by foreigners. He took power and defended Rome successfully, saved Rome. And then, instead of maintaining or holding on to his power at any cost, he retired. Cincinnatus provided a sort of code of honorable conduct, how an elite Roman is to provide civic duties and has sort of civic service to the community. It's an example of how to serve. In our own early republic, you may remember that George Washington was sometimes referred to as an American Cincinnatus. Washington, of course, served 2 terms as President of the United States and then simply walked away from power, went back to Mount Vernon and resumed his career as a farmer. This, of course, is unusual in political history. Men don't often walk away from power if they don't have to. So Cincinnatus provides this example that we'll see tracked down through the ages all the way to the early Republic of the United States. Another figure that I'm going to mention here is Gaius Marius, a general. He is significant for a few reasons. First, he professionalized the Roman army. He was a brilliant commander, fought many successful campaigns for Rome. He departed from the traditional practice of recruiting his soldiers only from, the traditional practice was to recruit soldiers from landed families, established families. Marius began to recruit people who did not own property. He recruited from the urban masses, for instance. So he began to construct legions that were comprised a little differently than the traditional legion. Now, Marius is important too because he established a bond with his soldiers. Once the wars were over, these men looked to him for their benefit, in the shape of land, perhaps, as a reward for their service. So you're beginning to see here a subtle shift in allegiance. The legionaries begin to identify and bond with their commander as opposed to the state, and this will cause problems as we go forward. He did award his troops, and their loyalty became more centered on his person than the Roman state. So this is going to begin a trend of generals building their armies for their personal use, in addition to serving the Roman state. The second general I'm going to mention here is Sulla. He followed Marius. He distinguished himself also in battle, and his legions formed an attachment to him. In 89, before the Common Era, the Roman Senate, demands that Sulla turn over his army in southern Italy. He refuses, and his army remains loyal to him. We can see this trend here. Sulla then marched on Rome. He executed his enemies. This sets a very dangerous precedent. Again, it's almost that the generals have a very large and dangerous gang employed by him, and they can exert political power through their armies. Sulla demands lands for his troops. The Senate contests this. The enemies of Sulla are posted throughout the city, and many of them are assassinated. We'll see later that Julius Caesar himself will follow these examples and this personal attachment that his soldiers have to him as opposed to the state itself. And we'll talk about Caesar here, probably the most famous of Roman figures. He's from an elite family, a patrician family. He was born in 100 before the Common Era. He had a sense of destiny. He believed that he had been descended from the gods. He admired Alexander the Great and wanted to surpass Alexander's achievements. He was appointed governor of Gaul. Gaul is north of what we think of as Italy, sort of southern France. He campaigned in Gaul for more than a decade. His legions were fanatically loyal to him. Of course, Caesar is almost also famous for comprising part of that first triumvirate. He and Pompey and another gentleman sort of divided power among them. Caesar becomes consul in 59 before the Common Era. He and Pompey emerge now as the most powerful men in the Roman Empire. In 49, Caesar will take his army and will break the law. He will cross the Rubicon River, headed south down the Italian peninsula. The Rubicon is a boundary, and Caesar was to maintain his legions north of that Rubicon. Once he crosses south of the Rubicon, he's breaking the law because he's bringing his army, his legions, to Rome to enforce his own political ambitions. See, what did Caesar say? The die is cast once his army crossed the stream. Of course, Caesar fears that without his army accompanying him, he could be assassinated. Civil war is now imminent. So he marches on Rome, establishes his power. Pompey flees. Caesar will pursue Pompey all the way to Egypt. There he meets the queen of Egypt, Cleopatra. They fall in love and have a son. They return, Caesar and Cleopatra will return to Rome for a great triumph, a great parade. Caesar himself sought absolute power, I suppose. He was appointed dictator. He did pass social reforms. He did try to help the urban poor. But I think he saw himself as a benevolent dictator. And the Senate grew increasingly suspicious and bitter about Caesar's ambitions and assassinated him, I believe in 44 before the Common Era. Caesar's assassination will, of course, inaugurate the civil wars, which will transform Rome from a republic into an empire. Let's talk about Augustus Caesar for a moment. The given name, Octavius, he is related to Julius Caesar, and Caesar appoints him as his heir before he dies. Augustus, of course, is the title given to him after he becomes emperor. He is the first of the Roman emperors. Augustus Caesar is commonly known as presiding over the Pax Romana, that is the Roman peace. Octavius, of course, is central to the civil wars that follow his uncle Julius Caesar's death. He forms with Mark Antony and another man what's called the Second Triumvirate. That is a three-man rule. The first triumvirate, of course, was with Pompey and with Caesar and another. This triumvirate will break up. Octavian and Mark Antony will battle for control of the empire. And Octavian will be finally successful and destroy Mark Antony's army and navy at the Battle of Actium in 31 before the Common Era. In 27, Octavian is proclaimed emperor and given the title Augustus. His arrangement in Rome as emperor gave him great power over the army. He had direct power over Egypt, and Egypt, of course, is the great granary of Rome, supplying the wheat to feed the people. He had power, legislative power. He could veto legislation. He could overrule provincial governors. He could sit alongside the elected consuls. So by Augustus' example, and one of the reasons he's significant, is that he demonstrates that absolute power can be disguised. It can be very subtly exercised. Augustus did not come off as an over-grasping and over-ambitious or greedy or power-hungry politician. This made it much easier for him to assume the heights that he did. So he learned from his uncle Julius Caesar's example, his bad example. The imperial army takes an oath of allegiance to Augustus. Expansion slows under Augustus. The Roman Empire reaches its height here. He realizes that patronage is the control, is the key for political control in Rome. And of course, the emperor is the ultimate patron. So let me conclude here with Augustus by saying that his very tactful handling of supreme power, his reign at the height of the Roman Empire, the Pax Romana, a long period of relative peace, and of course Augustus presides over great building projects, over this vast circuit of trade of which Rome is at the center, and he has gone down in history as one of the more successful rulers. He died in 14 of the Common Era. He'd been emperor for 40 years. And now the idea of power residing in the hands of one man no longer seems such a dangerous innovation, as we'll see as more emperors come to the fore. So I'm going to stop there with these generals and emperors, and we'll talk about the Roman legions in our next lecture. Thank you.